If you're new to Python and want to learn about variables, you've come to the right place. Before I start showing you how to use variables in code, I'd like to cover some of the fundamentals. I'll start with a definition. There are many definitions of variables online, but to be honest, some are very technical and not very useful to a lay person. The best definition I found was at tutorialspoint.com. It says the following: variables are the names you give to computer memory locations, which are used to store values in a computer program. You may be asking yourself, why are variables so important? And the answer is, variables are fundamental to computer programming. They allow code to be flexible and powerful. Most of the magical and cool things that are done in programming would be impossible without the use of variables. Python has a few rules for naming variables. A variable can't start with a number. It can have spaces. It can only contain lowercase letters from A to Z, uppercase letters from A to Z, numbers, and the sign underscore. In addition to the variable naming rules, Python also has variable naming conventions. These are designed to make your code easier to read, easier to understand, and to maintain. The first one is that you should only use lowercase letters. If the name of your variable has more than one word, then the words should be separated by the underscore sign. You should avoid using single letters as names of variables, and you should use as descriptive names as possible. It's very easy to assign a value to a variable in Python. First, you write the name of the variable on the left, followed by an equal sign, and then the value you want to assign to that particular variable. Please note the three red arrows pointed to the equal sign. I'm trying to call your attention to the fact that one single equal sign in Python doesn't mean that what's on the left equals what's on the right. It simply means that what's on the right is being assigned to what's on the left. So this is called an assignment operator in Python. So I'm going to open up my browser like we did the last time. I'm going to write MyCompiler. I'm going to click on the first link to open up MyCompiler web page. Okay, I'm already signed in over here, as you can see. If you haven't registered yet, I suggest that you do sign up, so this way you can not only save the programs, the codes that you're going to be writing, but also you can access them by going into your username and then looking down here. You're going to see My Program. So when you click that in your My Programs, you're going to see all the programs that you have saved. Okay, so we're going to click on Python, and today we're going to continue where we left off at the last lesson. Okay, so during the last lesson we were learning how to use the print command, and we have an example of a print command right here on the screen. It says print hello world. When you run a program, all it does is it prints hello world on the screen. Okay, so I explained that this is a string because it has information between quotation marks. If I had like a number outside a quotation mark like 7 and ran the program, you would have printed 7, and this 7 is not a string, but this 7 is a real number, a number that we can do calculations with. So I'm gonna add another 7 here so you can see the result should be 14. So it is 14, so these are real numbers. And if you're ever confused, just remember that if they're not in between quotation marks, these are actual numbers. If I put them like this, around quotation marks, or between quotation marks, and try to add them, it's going to print 77, because all it does is put the image of 7 next to another image of 7 instead of adding real numbers. Okay, all right, so this is what we did on the first lesson, but now we're going to use something called a variable. And this is what this topic is tonight. This lesson is about variables, what they are and how to use them, okay? So let me just write it down here so you know what we're talking about. So we're talking about variables. What are variables? If you're enjoying the contents of this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on my next videos. Variables are spaces in memory, the computer memory, where information or data is going to be stored. Okay, so think of it as a container for information you're going to put inside that variable. And a variable can hold anything in Python. It can hold numbers, it can hold strings, it can hold lists, it can hold that contain a string, or variables that contain a number, just to follow on the footsteps of the first class. Okay, so again, a variable is a space in memory. So when you put something to a variable, that means that information is located in a certain place in memory of your computer. It's like an address for that information. Okay, so how do we create a variable? We give it a name, and the name that you want. It could be anything, but it should make sense based on what you're trying to do. So since we're trying to show how to use numbers or strings, I'm gonna create a variable called number1, and I'm gonna put 7 inside number1. I'm gonna create another variable. I'm gonna call it number2 and put another 7 in there. So when you're creating variables, when you look at something like it's a word on the left side, and then there's an equal sign followed by something, that means that this is an assignment in programming. An assignment is when you create a variable and then you assign a value to that variable. And in this case here, the value that I'm assigning to variable number1 is the number 7, and the value that I'm assigning to variable number2 is another 7. And now I'm gonna print this number1 plus number 2. Look what happens. It prints 14. So when you look at the print statement, where before I used the numbers 7, the sign, the plus sign, plus another number 7, now I don't have to do that directly anymore. I can do that indirectly using the names of the variables where I assign those values to. So instead of using 7 plus 7, I'm using number1 plus number2, which is the same thing at the end, because these variables hold the values of 7. Now I can change the value of variable number 1 and say, well, this variable number 1 has a number 5 in it, and if I run the program, now the result has changed. It's now 12 because one variable contains the number 5, the other variable contains the number 7. So the total is 12. Another way we can do this is say I'm going to create a third variable here. I'm going to call it total. I'm going to assign the following: number 1 plus number 2. By the way, the little sign plus on my computer is on the right hand side of the keyboard. On the first line, when you see all the numbers, the last character is going to be a plus sign. So I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to change the content of the print statement by using what's called an F string. So this is something new I'm teaching you right now, other than variables. I'm teaching you how to use F strings. F stands for formatting or format, and basically it indicates to Python that I'm going to use a string that's going to contain some special formatting inside of it. So I open quotes, right? I'm going to say number 1 plus number 2 equals total. That's what I want to say. The number 1 plus number 2 equals whatever the total is. But if I run the program as I just wrote it here, it's not going to work. Look at this. It printed every word that I put inside the quotation marks, just like I wrote them. Number 1 plus number 2 equals total. But it's not what I want it to say. I want it to say 5 plus 7 equals 12. That's what I want it to say. So, and that's where the F string comes into play, because I'm going to show you how to fix this. All we have to do is put brackets, these types of brackets. In my computer, they are on the right side of my keyboard, right after the letter P. So I put brackets around the number 1. I put brackets around number 2. And I put brackets around the word total. What am I doing here? All I'm doing is telling Python that these words inside these brackets, they are not simple words, but they are names of the variables that I created up here. Let me create a space here so you can see it better. So by putting these brackets inside the quotation marks, I'm saying, hey, everything inside these brackets are names of variables. So you should put here the value of variable number 1, the value of variable number 2, and the value of variable total. So let's run the program now. Oh, it tells me there's an error. So I'm going to show you how to interpret the error messages, okay? It says there's a problem on line 7 of the code. So let's go back. This is line 7. So this statement right over here, okay? What else does it say? It says name error. It says name number 2 is not defined. Let me explain what this means. Anytime you see a message that says name error, it means that Python is looking at something, in this case here, number 2, as the name of a variable. I'm going to say it again. Anytime you see this type of error, name error in Python, it means that Python is looking at whatever it shows here in quotation marks on this message, that this number 2 here is not defined. But how's that possible? Because I did define it. If you look back here, I did define number 2 on line 4. So what's going on here? And here it is. If you look at number 2 the way it is written here, it is written with an N right here between the U and the B. But when I defined the word number, I did it correctly with an M between the letters U and B. So all I have to do here is to fix this, because this here is a typo. So I'm just going to do it, put an M in its place. I'm going to run a program and it should work. It says correctly 5 plus 7 equals 12. That's using variables containing numbers for calculations and also using an F string. Okay, but let me show you something similar with using strings. Okay, I'm going to create a variable called name. I'm going to assign the value. Remember, if I want this variable to contain a name is a string. So I have to put that in quotation marks. So here are my quotation marks. I'm going to write polka or poca. I'm going to say Poca Maria. Okay, that's the name I'm assigning to this variable called name. I'm going to create another variable called last name. When the variable has 2 names, I have to link those 2 names with an underscore. This is a tradition in Python. Okay, I'm going to say last name like that, space, the equal sign. I'm going to open quotation marks because I want it to contain a last name. I'm going to say Jean. Okay, now if I want to print it, I just write print statement, the print command, open parenthesis, I write name, comma, last name. and he prints Pouca Maria Jean. Okay? So he's printing the contents of these two variables that I created. Let's see what happens if I remove this comma here. So now name and last name without comma. It gives me an error. This is very important to note because you're going to find this all the time. If you don't understand this right now, you're going to be, breaking your head trying to decipher, trying to find out why this happened. But it says the following: there's a problem with line 6. So let's go back and see what's on line 6. Line 6 is the print statement. So there's a problem with this print statement. And then it says the kind of problem it is. It says it's a syntax error. A syntax error, it's an error that it has to do with the rules of how to write this particular language, Python. So I broke some rule of the language Python. That's what it means. And it says right here, that's an invalid syntax. So the syntax that I used in writing the code is wrong. And then you see this little sign right here. This sign is showing where the problem is. So it's pointing that the problem is right next to the word last name, the beginning of the word last name. And when we looked at, you go back to line 6, there's a space between the variable name and last name, but there's nothing in between. There should have been a comma. If I put a comma here, it's gonna, and then run the program, it's gonna work fine. All right. So when you put two variables or more than one variable inside the print statement, you have to separate them by commas. Or you could do something like this. You could put a little plus sign. I can use a plus sign. Let's see what's going to happen. Let me run the program. And he printed Pouca Maria Jean. But look what happened. Pouca Maria is separate, but Maria and Jean is together. Why? The reason why Pouca Maria is separate is because that's how he put the information inside the variable name. But I'm adding the content of this variable, which is Pouca Maria, with the content of this variable called last name. I'm just putting them together without any spaces. So that's why everything is, it appears together like that, Maria and Jean. So we need to put some space here, right? This is how you do it. You're going to say name plus, I'm going to open now the quotation marks, okay, with a space. And put another plus sign over here. So now I have a variable name plus a space plus another variable last name. Let's run the program and see what happens. Pouca Maria Jean. Now it appears correctly, right? So as you can see, there were two ways to show the information here. One is, like I just did right now, putting space with a quotation mark inside the print statement, inside the parenthesis. The other way is to simply put a little comma. So this way they're not going to show up together. Let me run this again so you can see. And Pouca Maria Jean is printed correctly. Okay? But now, as I just showed you before, I used an F string, so a string that has formatting in it with numbers. Let me use that here, variables that contain strings. So this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to say, I'm going to remove them from now so you don't get confused. So we have the print statement with nothing inside the parentheses, right? I'm going to say F to indicate that what follows now is going to be an F string, a string with special formatting inside. And then I'm going to use the quotes, two quotation marks, right? Inside here I'm going to say hello, comma. So I'm going to write just like we normally write in English. Hello, comma. I'm going to say name and last name and exclamation mark. If I try to run this over here, look at what's going to happen. Pay very close attention. We have an F, then we have quotation marks, and then we have something inside the quotation marks. You've learned so far that anything inside quotation marks is a string, right? So what do you think is going to print here if I press run? Let's see what happens. So it's printed hello name last name. Again, the reason why this is happening is because Python is treating everything inside the quotation marks as a string. So it's going to literally appear as we have it here, instead of using name as a variable and last name as a variable. To fix this, we're going to fix just like we did with the numbers. We're going to put the word name inside bracket, these types of brackets. And then I'm going to do the same thing with last name. So now when I run the program, it's going to print correctly. Hello, Paca Maria Jean. Instead of printing the word name and the word last name like before, now because it is the word name and last name are between brackets, it's printing the contents of these variables over here. See? Paca Maria Jean. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe to see more Python videos like this one. And check out my other videos. I'll see you next time.